Well, hey there, and welcome to Unmistakably You. I'm Amy, and I'm a wedding planner and educator here in London, Ontario, where it is finally looking like it might start to be spring. I don't know, maybe it's wishful thinking, but we've had a couple of warmer days here, and forecasts are looking like they're in the plus digits for the next couple of weeks. So, hoping that we are out of this winter weather. That was kind of a non-typical winter, but it seemed to drag on nonetheless. So if you're joining us for the first time, welcome. And we're actually continuing to talk about seasons today. If you've been with us for the last few weeks, you'll know that we've been doing a series throughout March about different seasons for your wedding and the corresponding considerations that you'll have to make. There are different things to think about in the summer than there are in the spring or in the fall. And so we've been joining you live every Wednesday for the past forever. But the last 4 weeks or 3 weeks, I guess, we've been talking about the seasons. So if you missed any of those and want to catch up, they are either in the video archives on our Facebook page or in the live archives on our YouTube page. So depending on where you're catching us, hi, and thanks for watching. We always like to know that you're here. So if you have a comment or a question, don't hesitate to post it in the comments or hit me up with an email after the fact, amy@unmistakably.you.com. More than happy to answer questions and just interact with human beings. And I always like to hear that maybe occasionally we say something that's helpful, or maybe occasionally we say something that's thought-provoking. So don't hesitate to reach out. Like I mentioned, we are today talking about what to think about for a fall wedding. And there are a lot of considerations that are very similar to other seasons with regard to, here in Ontario, the fickleness, if you will, of Mother Nature. We tend to have no really consistent weather no matter the season, but there are a few things that are kind of particular to fall that you might want to think about differently than you would if you were having a summer or a winter wedding. So one of them is that fall is very transitional. As we know, I have done beautiful, warm outdoor weather weddings on October the 29th. I've also done freezing cold, rainy indoor weddings at the end of September. So the key with a fall wedding is to be willing to roll with the punches, because you kind of never know what you're going to get. Weddings are like a box of chocolates in the fall. You never know what you're going to get. It could be really warm. It could be really cool. It could be really sunny. It could be really dull. It could be a torrential downpour. We just never really know. We do tend to get more rain here in Southern Ontario from mid-September until end of November. So it's definitely important to have a really solid rain plan. And we've been talking through that over the last few weeks. I won't rehash most of those details, but it's so, so important to have a rain plan or even a cold weather plan that you're comfortable with, and to designate somebody to implement that plan when it's drop dead time. So that shouldn't be you. You'll be busy doing other things, but you'll need to have somebody that you trust making that call, whether that's your wedding planner, your venue coordinator, your friend who's not in the wedding party. Just think through what that looks like if you do have to move things inside because it's too cold or because it happens to be rainy. Now, another sort of word about fall here in our climate. When I say fall, I'm sort of loosely talking about fourth week in September through end of November. But realistically, November in Southern Ontario is not an attractive month in a lot of ways. So unless you're hoping to do the entirety of your wedding indoors, I might steer clear of November, just because generally speaking, those beautiful fall colors have fallen from the trees. The ground tends to be dead and kind of muddy or barren, and it's just not a visually attractive outdoor month. So if you are thinking of having any component of your wedding outdoors and perhaps taking advantage of that beautiful fall foliage, really your window of best opportunity is from last week in September until third week in October. And November tends to be even more changeable than any of the other fall months. And usually you don't have a lot of those changing fall leaves to take advantage of. When it comes to choosing a venue for your fall wedding, you're going to want to think about climate control, just like in all of the other seasons. You want to consider that it could be warm or it could be cool, and you want to choose a venue that's able to accommodate for both. If you are planning a tent wedding or a private property wedding, like I've mentioned in both spring and summer, you'll want to think about the ability to cool your venue or to heat your venue. So if you're in a tent, you might want to investigate the potential for tent heaters, or you might want to think through your plan for having all of the sides up or some of the sides up, and have someone on task to determine what should happen with those tent walls. If it does happen to be a really nice warm day, you'll probably want to have them open for the majority of the day, but know that the temperature does drop drastically at night in the fall. So you may want to have someone completely enclose that space once that sun starts to go down and the temperature starts to plummet. That's something to think about if you are having outdoor components to your wedding as well. If you're doing a ceremony outdoors in the midday, chances are much better that it's going to be nice and warm. But if you're hosting, let's say, a Scotch bar or a cigar bar outdoors after the sun sets, it's liable to be pretty chilly no matter when in the fall you are. So just make some accommodations for the fact that temperatures from daytime to evening tend to fluctuate pretty dramatically in those fall months. The same thing goes for the sunset. If you look at the sunset time in the end of September versus the end of November, for instance, it's drastically different. So that's something you'll want to be very well aware of when you're setting the schedule for your day. Thinking about perhaps if you're getting married later in the season when the sun sets earlier, maybe moving that ceremony time ahead a little bit, especially if you're doing the bulk of your photography in between ceremony and reception. You want to make sure that you're doing, presumably if you're outdoors anyway, you want to make sure that you're doing the bulk of that photography during the natural daylight. So that might mean shifting everything forward a little bit. I always recommend consulting with your photographer and videographer when it comes to setting your schedule for photos, which often also determines the ceremony time. Ultimately, they have their finger on the pulse of when the sun sets at all times during the year. They have apps on their phones. They're all over it. So that's your first kind of line of defense in terms of setting a ceremony time that's going to be able to maximize outdoor light for photos. So definitely think about that. Now, as well as thinking about those outdoor components, you'll want to consider not only rain, but cold backups, or even beautiful outdoor, how are we going to keep our guests comfortable kind of plans. So when it comes to planning for outdoor components, you may want to kind of have a couple of plans and wait until a couple of weeks before, 2 to 4 weeks before, to kind of pull the trigger on which plan you implement, because you may be providing refreshments for your guests at an outdoor ceremony if it's likely to be a really warm day. You may want to provide pashminas or blankets for your guests at an outdoor ceremony if it's likely to be a really cool day. Maybe you want to provide umbrellas for your guests if they're moving from parking lot to reception hall, or if they're moving from ceremony to reception, or out to washrooms that aren't within your facility if it's a tent wedding. So thinking through guest comfort for all of the potential weather variations that you might encounter is going to be really important, and not pulling the trigger on a plan until it's close enough to the date that we have some kind of a sense of the advance forecast predictions. Pardon me. Sorry. Live video, very glamorous, isn't it? When it comes to those fall weddings, particularly if you have had some wet weather, you'll want to think through how to keep your wedding attire clean. So with regard to transportation, particularly if you're driving yourselves, and this certainly applies to really any season, but especially any wet season, spring, winter, fall, you want to make sure that if you're driving yourselves, you have those vehicles detailed, especially those door jambs, and especially if you've just had a pre-winter rust proofing under your car or your vehicle. You want to make sure that none of that oil or grease or dirt transfers to any of the wedding party's attire. So make sure that you've had those vehicles detailed. And you also, with regard to keeping your clothes clean, want to think about your photo locations. Even if it happens to be a beautiful, warm, sunny day, which I sincerely hope for your sake that it is, if it's been wet at all beforehand, the ground tends to be a little bit soggier in the fall months. So scout out your photo locations a couple of days before. Maybe that beautiful place out in the backwoods where you were thinking of having your wedding party photos done is a sea of mud at this point. So you want to check that out and have a plan B in your back pocket if you're doing outdoor photos. If it does happen to be muddy, maybe you want to choose some high and dry ground. Maybe you want to have some clear shower curtains around that your photographer can position for you, and then you can stand on top of to keep especially those long dresses, bridal gowns or bridesmaids gowns, out of that mud. Now, when it comes to choosing a schedule, we kind of talked about daily schedules in terms of when the sun sets, but we didn't talk about general date choosing. And so that's something that we kind of touched on November being sort of icky. But another thing that happens in November that you shouldn't forget about is the time change. So we go out of daylight savings time. So whatever that is, normal, regular time, whatever we call that. What that means ultimately is that the clocks go back and that sunset gets an hour earlier. So that happens on the first Sunday in November, and you want to accommodate for that when you're planning for your wedding date. If it's after that date, the sun will set a full hour earlier. If it's that weekend, you also need to think about the fact that technically the clocks here in Ontario go back at 2 a.m. Sunday morning. So does that have an effect on your bar service times? If now all of a sudden it's 1 o'clock, does that extend your alcohol service times? Does it potentially create any transportation travel issues for your guests? So think through that with regard to some time differences here in Ontario, where we still switch to daylight savings time and then back out of it in the fall again. When it comes to your wedding party, some considerations for them. Definitely you want to kind of apply the same filter that you applied to guest comfort. So if it's warm and sunny, they probably still need sunscreen, even though it's fall. If it's cool or windy, might you want to provide shawls or pashminas or wraps of some kind? So definitely thinking about keeping your wedding party comfortable. You might even need some jackets if you're going to do any photos outside for any length of time and it does happen to be cold. You'll want to, when you're choosing your wedding party attire, think about what the foliage is likely to be doing if you're doing any outdoor photos, and think about how the colors of your wedding party attire are going to play in with those fall colors that may be in your background. You'll also want to think about flower availability, and this of course goes for any season, but there are some beautiful flowers like dahlias, for instance, that are available in the fall that you can't get necessarily early in the spring unless you're importing them from somewhere out of our country, far away. And there are also some flowers that you can't get in the fall, like tulips or peonies, for instance. So this is where, calling on the impressions and advice of your professionals is really important. Talk to your florist, trust their opinion. Talk to your photographer and videographer, trust their opinion. And it's going to result in what's hopefully a beautiful and stress-free day for you to celebrate your fall wedding. As always, if you have questions, don't hesitate to contact me. Like I mentioned, amy@unmistakably.you.com. If you have tuned in and seen something that you like, shoot me a quick little message or give us a thumbs up or whatever it is you do to show us that we're not talking to nobody out there. It's much appreciated. Next week, however, we won't be talking. So not that we're talking to nobody, it's just that we're not going to be here. It is actually the opening of a show that I'm musical directing next week. And so I have a show next Wednesday evening. Myself and my daughter actually will both be, I'll be musical directing, and she'll be performing in Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. So what that means is that I'm just going to cancel next Wednesday night because it's a crazy busy week. And much as I love you, I am not going to be able to be here. So Connect with us again the following Wednesday, and we will be back with some more content. As always, I encourage you to submit any questions that you have so that you can help us actually plan content that is relevant and useful to you. Final plug is for our upcoming First Dance workshop. This is an evening workshop. It's 1.5 to 2 hours long. It is not going to choreograph a first dance for you, but what it is going to do with Clara from See You Move is teach you how to just be comfortable on the dance floor. You're going to learn how to dance with a partner. You're going to learn a couple of moves that you can incorporate to feel a little bit more comfortable and natural out on the dance floor during that first dance at your wedding. So if you're interested in signing up for that, it's at www.unmistakably.you.com/workshops. There are only a few spaces remaining. So head on over to that site and you can reserve your space before they're all gone. I look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks. Take care and happy planning.